filmed and streamed live, and the recording and transcript will be published afterwards on the States Assembly website. Please ensure all electronic devices, including mobile phones, should be switched to silent. I'd ask that any members of the public who have joined us in the room today to not interfere in the proceedings, and as soon as the hearing is closed, please leave quietly. If there is any interruptions, I will stop the hearing and stop recording and require those who are interrupting to leave the meeting. So maybe we first start with introductions. My name is Deputy Hilary Jearn, and I'm Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Tom Coles, Vice Chair.
Deputy David Waugh, panel member.
Deputy Steve Luce, I'm Minister for the Environment.
Kelly Whitehead, Group Director for Regulation.
Thank you, Minister. And just put this into context, today's hearings focus specifically on questioning you about the PFAS Scientific Advisory Panel's fourth report that was published yesterday, and the government's response to this and readiness to implement the recommendations made to date. We will also examine the draft water law amendment regulation that you have lodged towards the States Assembly tomorrow. And the amendment that you've lodged for the States Assembly next week. And just to be clear about setting the parameters, this session will not examine the scientific basis of PFAS, nor the work of the PFAS Advisory Panel. And our questions are centred solely on government action, progress and planning. And we have covering questions over 5 areas around the report, the environmental monitoring and data quality of the report, for government response to interim report for P26 2026, interdepartmental coordination, and finally that future-looking risk planning and long-term environmental management. So kicking off, Minister, the panel would like to begin with this broad overview. So there's been a significant amount of work that has been undertaken to date in relation to PFAS in Jersey. Could you outline your overall assessment of the progress made so far and how effective you believe the government's response has been up to this point?
Thank you, Chair. Interesting question. Let's go back maybe to a time when I first became Environment Minister. And I'll include the Health Minister became the Health Minister, and I think very shortly after that time, he and I decided that we were going to take action on PFAS. It's been a subject which has been discussed for a great deal of time. We knew we had an issue at the airport, and I think the Health Minister and myself were resolved to do what we could within our 2-year period, knowing that our 2 years plus was going to be quite short to actually get anything meaningful done. So it was a question of really getting stuck in, and the panel were engaged. They were selected, and I can't say how pleased I was to have such a reputable small group of people working on our behalf. I was particularly pleased with the fact that everything was done in public. In fact, I was almost surprised that they did as much work in public as they did. All their deliberations, as you know, were done in public or for the public to witness. And their engagement of other experts literally around the entire globe, where people had experience of treating PFAS, or people had all walks of the PFAS area, chemists and geologists, everybody was consulted about every feasible part of this programme. Originally, I think the intention was, and I know this because I'm thinking back to my own declaration of wanting to do something and when I was going to announce. The original intention was to be completed by before last Christmas. Because they wanted to do a little bit of an additional work, we agreed to continue to work with them into 2026. But because I wanted to move forward on water specifically, I requested that they came forward with an interim report 4, which I thought was very important. I wanted to know specifically about water well ahead of June this year. And so they agreed to do that. And as you know, they had a number of interim reports. The last draft we've had published yesterday, 5 weeks consultation with the public, and the panel will look at those responses before finally issuing their final report, if you like, after that. But in response to your initial question, Chair, I can say that I'm delighted with the way we've moved forward. The island is taking this absolutely seriously. People can see that. We've had top people on the job. For my own part in this, we've got some recommendations from the panel which I'm pleased in general to accept. But specifically, the Health Minister's not here today, but the other thing we must realise is that we're doing a lot of work, the early work was done on health, and we've taken those recommendations from the panel as well. We're moving forward. We're now in the process. We've started the process of helping those with high levels of PFAS in their blood. We're making proper meaningful progress. So it's not just words, this is actions, deeds. We're getting on and doing something. So I can say in a short 2-year period, I think we've done exceptionally well.
Thank you, Minister. And you talked about the fact that though the draft fourth report was published yesterday, of course, there's been these 2 interim reports that already provided a lot of recommendations. I know the recommendations that were drafted yesterday, there's some new ones in there, but a lot you've known about for a while from those 2 interim reports. And so maybe a question is around how did you go about assessing those findings and recommendations, even when you started seeing those interim reports, and what were the immediate considerations that jumped out that you felt that government could respond to quickly?
Well, obviously the most significant one, if you like, affects the mains drinking water supply, and there was always going to be a recommendation of some sort from the scientific panel about where we might want to go with that. And very early on, I pressed them to make sure that we were getting some indications of where they wanted to go, and they have been pretty much consistent all the way through about their level of 4 nanograms per litre. And I was determined that I wanted that level decided on and published so that everybody knew what was coming. And as I said before, my initial intention was to have all this decided before Christmas, but because of the way things fell about, the panel wanted to continue their work, but I did ask them to publish their interim report for Christmas, and they did that. And yes, I think we've seen those indications coming, first as an indication, then a more formal, and then cemented in and what have you. But there's certain parameters that were going to be consistent. The 4 nanograms was always a consistent one. The only thing that might have changed was they might actually, and they told me they would consider it, they might have gone lower. They did spend some time considering whether 2 nanograms would have been a level they wanted to get to, or they would recommend that we get to. But they wanted to finish the work on analysing food before they did that, because we're now, and this is something I've realised during the course of the 2 years, one initially thought that water was the important issue here, and of course it is important, but when it comes to daily intake, 80% of your PFAS intake comes from food, 20% from water. So analysing food was vitally important before deciding on the level of water.
And I think we'll go a little bit more into that questioning around the amendment to the water law later, focusing on that one. But of course, that's only one recommendation of 31.
Yes, there's
now.
31 there.
Recommendations, and so that kind of the question is really, is there any significant adjustments or reprioritisation apart maybe from the water? You've mentioned that, but there's 30 other recommendations to stand out to say that needs to come. Before in the interim 2 reports, you saw those recommendations already and said we need to act quickly on those, and you've put in measures already or started to, or now since yesterday, is there anything that you go, actually this really does need attention?
I don't think there is, Chair. As you said, there's 31 recommendations. 7 have been added into this last version, which came out yesterday, and 1 has been revised on the what we do with
It's potatoes, isn't it?
waste material from PFAS, if you like, for want of a better
Yes.
word, where the panel have added the possibility of regenerating or recovery of those materials. And I think a lot of that's to do with the ability to incinerate on island, and whether we might look to send it away, get it treated, and then bring it back again. And of course, if you're going to recycle or recover, it's much easier to export knowing that you're bringing it back again, because waste licenses for export are quite challenging. So that's the new one. The others have just been updated. That's 1 that's been updated, and 7 new ones have been added. Certainly one that's going to jump out in the media quite clearly is the recommendation on sea foam. And I think that's, in some ways, a real positive for us because sea foam comes from the sea, and the analysis that we've done is that the sea is not a problem. It's consistent with PFAS and levels of PFAS in seawater in other jurisdictions, so nothing to be concerned about over there. We're not a particular hotspot in Jersey when it comes to PFAS and seawater. But foam, not just for PFAS, but lots of other materials, collects, if you like, chemicals because of the way chemicals are attracted to surfaces. And I think it's right that we highlight that playing in foam, whether there's PFAS in it or not, is a possible.
And we'll ask a little bit.
I could just support the Minister in terms of that. I think that was a really key, important point from coming out at the end of the report 4, which is the broader environmental monitoring. So whilst water and mains water was a focus of the first report, the second report did focus on food, but also some really key recommendations around soil when we did lots of soil testing, and the soil testing indicating that PFAS levels in soil were exceptionally low and below background levels in the majority of our fields. Also, a lot of recommendations around intervention technologies and destruction technologies, and quite a lot of detailed science that came out from those areas. But as the Minister said, broader environmental in terms of groundwater, surface water, bathing waters, sea foam, seaweed, there was quite a wide range of environmental factors, really looking at the fact of how does Jersey compare as a jurisdiction overall. And I think the key conclusion from the PFAS panel is, besides the area of known contamination around the airport, which is not uncommon because a lot of airports have used firefighting foams that have a particular contamination in that area, the remainder of Jersey was all within very normal levels and nothing that would jump out of concern.
And of course thank you, Kellyanne. Of course this is the draft 4th report, so there is open to now consultation, and the panel will potentially meet again. They said it last night to compile those consultation and then respond accordingly. Of course, that could potentially change. Some of those recommendations. So I was just wondering, do you see that really we have to do a bit of a pause before the government starts going into how these recommendations can be implemented until that report is, or is there areas that can just be going ahead whether there's consultation or not?
Well, I think the thing to say, Chair, is that I don't think there will be any pausing because this is an important issue, and I'd like to feel that the next minister, whoever that is, takes up the challenge. Well, it's not a challenge. Takes up the baton and continues to run with it. But certainly, when the final report is published, following the 5 weeks of consultation, there will be some guidance issued, and I think we can see through the way the other recommendations come out that there is a lot more work for government to do. There's a lot of things to consider, and there's a lot of guidance to be issued. But the important piece, the 4 nanograms, if you like, the drinking water legislation, I think is one bit that is potentially going to be set in stone. We don't know, but it'll be for debate in the Assembly next week. Whereas a lot of the other recommendations will result in officers doing work on what we might and might not do, which paths we might take or might not take. There's a lot of guidance about levels of PFAS in land and soil and how we might treat contaminated material, whether that's fields or what have you. There's a lot more sampling of food to be done, particularly potatoes. There's a lot more analysis of other foods that are grown. There's lots more work to do.
And I think focusing on that, maybe the monitoring, how does that, maybe we could talk a little bit about that monitoring, because that's the first step. And Kelly, you talked about that, is that monitoring. There's quite a lot of recommendations that is that continued monitoring.
Well, the water team, and I'll just for 2 seconds. Well, we have a team inside the Environment Department who do all water quality monitoring, and of course the water quality monitoring that they do will continue. They're adding a few more little sites. We'll continue to speak to Arcadis about potentially coming to do some more monitoring as and when necessary. But evidence is everything for us in the department, and we need to carry on monitoring these sites on a regular basis to get levels, because it's always important, at the very least, to do at least 12 months monitoring, because chemicals in groundwater vary depending on the season, and of course in the winter you get more rain, the levels vary.
It's right, absolutely, Minister. And I think that and just for the specifics, that is the water quality in groundwater, so borehole testing. But if I could just return to the previous question for a point of clarification in the way that the panel work in terms of their report. The panel's report is not open to consultation, and it's a clear distinction that the PFAS panel make. It is open for islander input, and what they are seeking are points of clarification, things that they missed, things that are not well understood because it might be too technical, that they are looking for experience to add to the report. What they were very clear with, and what they made the point last night in the public meeting, is that the recommendations that are grounded on international evidence and scientific research and the evidence base would not be recommendations that they would change due to islander input. So the islander input is really questions, clarifications, where they've read it. So that what they do, if you have a look at reports 1, 2 and 3, is they have a table format of all the islander input and the questions, and they draw where that recommendation or where that evidence is within the body of the very large 500-page report, or if they make additions or clarifications, it's usually to the discussion points within the body of the text. So whilst we can't rule out that it could not be changes to recommendations, on the whole, the islander input is about clarification points. Where it is grounded in international science, they have said that it is unlikely to change.
Thank you for that clarification, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, I should have added, Chair, that because Kelly's got it absolutely right. What the panel are not doing with their final report is consulting, if you like. They're inviting.
No, that's really clear. That's good to get the terminology right. And I suppose just turning back to the monitoring, because that is the basis of everything, both from a water perspective, but obviously the recommendations also including around soil, around biosolids, around many other, and the food, specifically around eggs in certain areas and potatoes. So there's a number of monitoring areas that the government would need to set up. Do you see then there's a clear step up that you're currently monitoring some of those things, or is there a gap, and where would that gap be? Not only in, I suppose, the amount of reporting, but maybe the area and geographical area. Do you see that there needs to be a wider?
Well, I think it's clear we've done a huge amount of work in a very short period of time, but as we move, and what we've had to do during that time is resist the calls from some islanders to take their individual cases differently, and we've had to focus on the plume area and the areas outside of the plume. And I think as we move forward, the panel are quite clear. We continue to need to monitor water sources, whether that's streams or what have you, and it may be in the future that we detect, and we're not seeing it at the moment, because outside of the plume area we don't see, apart from 2 out of the 40-odd, 38-odd, we don't see elevators of levels of PFAS. But if we do, it may be incumbent upon us to start testing other areas, but at the moment we're concentrating on the plume, we're concentrating on the Port Moche areas and the other areas where Jersey water can't abstract at the moment because the levels are high.
So okay, Kelly.
Yeah, absolutely, Minister. I would also just add that potentially it's not a step up, because the team have been monitoring annually since 2022. So for quite a number of years, we have a large data set, which is also included and published in the panel's report. So in terms of testing, I think the only new testing that we started to initiate last year was comprehensive food testing, but that was specifically to provide a Jersey context to this report. And in terms of the single recommendation of testing for potatoes, we have done another potato run, obviously for this season.
So the interim reports describe exposure scenarios, but they don't necessarily focus on like kind of the Jersey specific modelling. So stepping back out of like the plume area and seeing whether there are different pathways of building up PFAS over a number of different things, and not just water, but as you said earlier, Minister, about the food, about in the soil.
I mean, we
Do
could.
you see the need to do a full modelling assessment?
I think we need to be very clear, Chair. We have the potential, if we wanted to analyse food consumed by people in Jersey ad nauseum. That would be hugely expensive. The first thing we'd have to do would be to go out to the public and do a proper analysis of exactly what type of diet they eat, what's the average consumption. We'd then have to work out what the proportion of that comes from England, what comes from Europe, what comes locally. Trying to build up a really, really, really accurate, detailed study of the PFAS in food for Jersey residents would be quite a challenge, not just financially, but time and effort. So what we've done here is we've analysed local production of food. We've accepted most of it comes from the UK. We've taken the results from UK food that's been analysed over the years, accepting as well the fact that actually PFAS in food is dropping over the decades. It's fallen and continues to fall, so that's great news. But we have had to take some assumptions. The panel have had to take these. The panel advised us, that they've had to make some assumptions on the basis that doing a really detailed analysis of what the Jersey public eat would take years and a lot of money and a lot of resource.
And Minister, that would also be risk-based. So at the moment, in terms of sampling we have done, the levels of PFAS are so low and almost negligible in some cases that it wouldn't merit further studies. And I would say that would potentially cover the environmental monitoring as well, where we would see things that are very low risk. It wouldn't justify a significant survey or future monitoring. So it's about making sure you take that proportionate approach. And the area of known contamination is obviously the focus. What we've done is had a broad sweep, and we've not found anything else significant to merit the future.
Yes.
So I just really want to get some reassurance. Apologies for my voice here. So those islanders who've been tested for PFAS, who have raised levels of PFAS in their bloodstream, can they be reassured that, I'm trying to think, that's possibly coming from food, it's not coming from water, or why are we still seeing these raised levels? Why are we not seeing low levels? What reassurance can be offered to them that the current action is the right
reassurance
rather
is
than
that
actions?
the first thing is that we're on it, so we're looking at the problem. So we've got some issues. If you really have raised and you can find yourself on the medical pathway, there's things we can do to help. The other thing I would say, which not necessarily of a reassurance, but food generally is dropping. Levels are falling because of the awareness of the challenge. But the difficulty we have with people who live outside of the plume, if they've had blood testing done, is from a medical point of view and from an evidence-based point of view, we're not 100% sure how those tests were done, where they were done, which laboratory analysed them, because that's important as well. And of course, the other problem we have on our side is that we have no idea of the history of these individuals, what they've done, where they lived, what type of food they have consumed during their lifetime. I don't know, there's a number of things within a household, for example, where there's levels of PFAS in, just doing everyday tasks within the home. And it's very difficult to say to an individual, or we can say why, just off the top of our head, why you've got high levels of PFAS. There may be any number of issues. It may be they've had a really good diet or not such a good diet. I don't know. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Kelly. But
I think you're absolutely right, Minister. I think to do a clinical investigation on the history of an individual's life and all the points of exposure that may have occurred is obviously really complex and complicated. It's not a single point for a whole population. I think that is what the conclusions are coming to. But as the Minister said, those that we can have a definitive link, which, say, for example, the residents in the known who are drinking borehole water in the known area of contamination, there is the clinical service that is now up and running with blood testing as part of the health response.
So I suppose coming back to just finalising on the environmental monitoring, because I say that is the, going forward, and I say the report did highlight that there is, the data, there is caution with the data because there is uncertainties in certain areas. There isn't that widespread monitoring. And just to clarify, am I hearing that I know that the recommendations say that there should be monitoring, but to say that that's already happening and there won't be a step up in monitoring in the areas that especially some of the pathways, maybe not, well, the food, I mean, they already are saying eggs and potatoes. So there is some recognition that there needs to be a continued monitoring, but is that all a step up, and which is it? Is it continuing monitoring that's happening already, or is there a recognition that there has to be actually a step up on monitoring as the recommendations?
I think it's fair to say we've done a huge amount of monitoring, we've done a huge amount of testing, and some areas I think we will continue to test that are important to the island. Potatoes, for example, is something we're going to continue to monitor. But other foods that we've looked at where levels have been non-existent or negligible or haven't been able to detect PFAS, you know, as Kelly said, it's going to be a matter of resource, and where the risk is very low, we've done a certain amount of testing and we found nothing in this area. Why would we continue to test there when we could go and look somewhere else? And it may well be, Chair, that, you know, we identify certain water courses or what have you, or certain, for whatever reason, elevated levels of PFAS in ground or water or what have you, that we might decide are significant enough to warrant a further investigation on a different site. Because the panel are quite clear that, you know, if we do identify other hotspots, I think we should be doing something about it. At the moment, as I said, we've concentrated on the Prüm area. We've got a lot of work to do there. The remediation of the hotspot at the airport fire training ground, or the airport generally, is something, the work we're continuing to do. We'll shortly have some sort of proposal from ports as to how they propose to remediate that. And that once we can stop the PFAS escaping from the site, that's a really important step for us, because what we need to do is to go back to source and try, and we can make all the filtrations and all the different types of processes you like further out, but if you can stop the source, that's a really good start. So we know we've got a hotspot at the airport. We will shortly have a plan to come up with to see how we can stop that happening. We address that area, we may then move on to other areas if we find, but I'd like to think that if we do find other hotspots, there will be a single specific reason for that, which may be easier to remediate and easier to deal with. It may be that it's diminishing over time, as they all are, and we don't need to, I don't know, we'll have to see. But that would, for me, would be the only significant step up in monitoring, if you like, I think, because unless we identify some other food which we haven't thought of, I don't know where else we would go to monitor.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So moving on to government response to the interim report. The government's interim response outlines a number of actions already underway in relation to the panel's draft recommendations. Could you begin by explaining the overarching principles guiding the government's approach to implementing the panel's advice, and how you intend to ensure decisions remain evidence-led to the research involved, as the research evolves?
Well, certainly I would, for me, like to continue in the same vein that we've done so far. As I said, the panel have worked in public all the way through, all their discussions with other experts around the globe, other areas in Europe and what have you, have always been done in public. People can tune in and watch the discussions happening live in front of the panel. Have had meetings, as I have done, as they did last night, with the general public, where anybody could turn up and speak to us. And certainly the Health Minister and myself have had a number of meetings. It started off really with the residents of the Plume area, and I'm thinking back, it's some time ago now, that was at the rugby club, and those meetings developed. We got to the point where we needed more space because more people were turning up, and I'd like work to continue in that vein where at all possible, because it's important that we're not hiding anything here. I know there's people out there believe we've got secret stuff that we're not saying. There's nothing that we haven't, that isn't on the website. And I might actually at this point, Chair, just mention the work that the team have done has been phenomenal. But what we did at early doors is to make sure that all the information we had was put on a specific website for PFAS for the public to go on. Every question we've been asked has received an official answer. Every question and answer has gone on the website. There is a huge, I can't say how much information there is on the website, all publicly available, and we're not hiding anything. The good, bad and the ugly is all there. That's the way I would like to continue if we can.
And also just to add to that, Minister, that all of the meetings from the PFAS panel have been online, are also video recorded, and they're all available as well. So the full video recording as well as the summarisation, the minutes that are published, again, full transparency across the board.
So I know this came up in the Assembly last week, but what is the government's plan for households using private supplies with high PFAS levels? And will mandatory PFAS testing be introduced for private supplies?
Well, I am not going to say that mandatory levels in private supplies are going to be, we're not going to test everybody and what have you, but we do have some recommendations from the panel about how we deal with private supplies. I think there's two different ways to do that. Obviously, we could have a borehole or a private supply supplying a number of different properties. There's recommendations for that. If you've got a single borehole supplying a single property, there's recommendations for that. Certainly, for the single borehole on one property, the panel are recommending that the occupants, the owners of the property, might want to look at some sort of under-sink filtration system. But what they are very specific about is there's a number of different things you could do. But more generally, I think they feel that a number of different processes lead you to a better result rather than a single jug which filters. They would recommend RO and potentially UV.
And so really to carry on with that one, that is, does government intend to remediate contaminated groundwater used by private wells?
I could answer that if that's okay. So there is an abstraction part of a different piece of legislation, and within Jersey it's not the same obligations. So it's really down to the individual landowner. We have a registry of boreholes, but to that extent it's not licensed, so it's not that legal sort of end framework. So one of the recommendations from the panel is around getting better information. So when the panel were asking information about boreholes and what they're used for. Is it drinking water? Is it showering? Is it swimming pools? Is it gardens? We don't have that information because there's no legal requirement and people don't offer that information voluntarily. So one of the recommendations is to try to do an encouragement to those private landowners who do have private water supplies, boreholes or wells and springs to come forward with information so we can get better data on it. But with the absence of a legislative structure, you can't compel people to do that necessarily. But what the panel didn't do, the panel didn't recommend that should move into an enforceable regulatory legal requirement. Sure. They said, okay, in Jersey, you don't have the same legislation in the UK. You don't have that requirement on private landowners that do have private water supplies to have an enforceable limit. So it's an advisory limit, and there's some advice around coming forward with information so the government has that data. There's also recommendations around the public authority providing up-to-date information to inform individual householders on private supplies about all the options that are available to them. Sure. And we will be coming forward with that information on gov.je in the upcoming months. So that's a piece of work that we will continue to do.
Yes. There's already a recommendation as part of the rented dwellings that if you are renting a unit, a property which uses a borehole, I think there's some recommendations on treating water that you should do, if that property is rented. Obviously, if you're living it in yourself, there's no obligation, but I think there are some obligations if you're renting.
Okay, we'll move on to biosolids. So the response notes broad support for recommendations relating to biosolid use and crop types. When will government provide updated guidance to farmers?
Well, I think, Deputy, that's one of the things we'll wait for the final report. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of it, if there's any changes, but certainly the use of biosolids to land, we have a number of different sources of biosolid, but certainly one of the main ones would be coming from Belazan. And we know from the work that we've done that the levels of PFAS in those biosolids have improved dramatically since the work of the steering group identified that there was some PFAS in water that was leaving the airport and making its way to Belazan. So we know through testing the biosolids coming out of Belazan, the PFAS levels have reduced a lot since then. Obviously, there's also biosolids from Jersey Water's treatment works. But again, the panel have come out with some recommendations on where they feel we should move, and we will certainly look at those and issue guidance. But the general message is everything is really okay, and it's only in certain circumstances that you would seem to maybe have a think about it or change tactics. Where we put biosolids back to land, there's very few tests which are showing elevated levels. So at the moment, I think the message on biosolids is okay.
When we questioned the Minister for Infrastructure on this, related to Belazan and also Le Colette, in the sense of receiving biosolids or receiving offshoot from that, they said, well, they've stopped, so they don't receive that anymore. And so we asked, well, where does it go? Where before they now don't receive it, and they were unable at that time to answer. Is there something that you've had a discussion with the Infrastructure Minister to understand the pathway?
Well, I can say that I haven't had any detail. In fact, I can't remember having a discussion with the Infrastructure Minister on the subject. But clearly it was a concern to me when I anecdotally, and I stress anecdotally, heard that, La Colette might refuse to take materials with PFAS in it, given the fact that PFAS appears in just about everything these days. And I had a sort of a nightmare scenario where everything turning up with Belazan was being turned around and sent away. Because actually, in some ways, that's not really good news, because it goes somewhere else in a lot of cases. Or what do you do with it? You take it back to where you put, you don't want to go there really. But panel have come out with some recommendations on various levels where you might want to treat. And I think generally speaking, La Colette should be a lot more comfortable now, because the panel have said there will be a very minute background level of PFAS in materials, but we're just going to have to get used to that in a way.
So it comes on to really trigger levels. So the government broadly supports using land type specific trigger levels for PFAS in soils. What is the process of translating those triggers into an operational assessment framework, and who will be responsible for follow-up action?
Well, I think that's something that very clearly will have to come out of discussions with the panel after their last report. Guidance will have to be developed within the department as to how we deal with that. There's some semi-complicated stuff there, and trying to work out when you might want to even test alone is the first question, and then what do you do with the results, and then depending on what the results are, the guidance will have to reflect that.
Yes, absolutely, Minister. I think it's a policy decision potentially for the new government, but at this stage, the PFAS panel is purely advisory at this stage. So they're saying that it's an indicator that it's unreasonable to consider zero PFAS generally. So their point being that 1 micrograms per kilogram of dry weight within soil would be background levels, and so therefore levels of 4 for very micrograms per kilogram for very sensitive things, growing crops or water abstractions, would be a trigger that we would say below that is not PFAS affected. So that would be levels.
Can you just repeat those numbers for what you've been saying?
Yeah. So the point being is that PFAS is ubiquitous across the environment, and it's not reasonable to consider zero to be the threshold. So background levels within all sources, the environment, woodlands, rainfall, seawater, everywhere would be, in particularly for the environment in terms of soil, 1 microgram per kilogram would be considered background level. So anything less than that is not considered PFAS affected. So they were saying a trigger level for possible investigation on sensitive crop production land where you might be growing in the soil could be around 4 micrograms per kilogram. And if it was less than that, you wouldn't consider that PFAS affected. So you would only look at it if it was above that threshold. The thresholds then go up. So 8 is micrograms per kilogram is for residential or any sort of human, contact-based use, and then for other land is up to 20. So if we look at all the soil testing, there was only one specific field that would reach over the 20 that would be considered PFAS affected. And you would potentially then start to do a risk-based assessment on that particular land about possible intervention and investigation. All of the other soil testing across the 45 that we did would not have any of those trigger levels. So they would be deemed not PFAS affected.
And the scientific panel also talk about soil washing. So if you found something which was over the level, what would you do? And they talk about soil washing. And again, I think we wait for the final report. There's a number of things, I'm not sure. I think they feel technology might help us in the future, but something we need to look at. It's not something we need to act on immediately, but we certainly need to consider that and how we might do it.
So it leads me on to the next question, really, about incineration and getting rid of PFAS. So the government acknowledges limited access to appropriate scale incineration technology in Jersey. What practical alternatives are being considered by PFAS for PFAS treatment residue? So you've talked about soil washing. Is that it? Or?
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. I think there was always a realisation that the energy from waste plant might not get up to a level of heat sufficient to to destroy PFAS. So there was discussions, and I haven't heard or discussed this subject lately, but there was discussions about medical incineration going to a much higher level of heat, and whether that level would be sufficient, whether we in the future would need to build a new medical incinerator. In any case, could we incorporate it and do that, use that for incineration? But I think the other one is that we might find that incineration is not obviously the only option, and it may be sending the material off our land to be remediated and return again once it's cleaned to a specialist operator in the UK, most likely, would be another option. But just looking forward, we do need to consider the methods of destroying or getting rid of PFAS very carefully and very seriously, because we've spoken already about a single borehole, single unit, and having an under the sink filter. But if you have multiple filters and people start, they all get disposed of in the regular waste cycle that goes to the energy from waste plant. Is that getting destroyed? What is their PFAS? So we need to think really carefully about the route that we go down, because any process which and I use the word filters out PFAS, at the end of it, you've got a very heavily PFASed material that then needs to be dealt with. So that, just because you're taking it out over here doesn't mean it's disappearing in thin air, unfortunately. So there will be continued work to be done on the most appropriate route. And how we deal with the PFAS after the filtering is a part of that discussion, clearly.
Okay. So, did you want to ask a question, or are you?
No.
I'll just ask one more here. So, the response states the government is undertaking and maintaining a Jersey-specific testing and monitoring programme to strengthen the local evidence base and ensure recommendations can be considered in Jersey context. Could you outline what this testing and monitoring programme will involve and how its findings will feed into the final decision-making process?
Well, I'll let Kelly deal with that in specifics, but I think in general, as I said, potatoes are a particularly important crop to the island for a whole range of reasons. That's one particular food or one crop that we would want to test. And obviously, as we've mentioned, we will continue to test boreholes and streams and stuff because, as I said before, the important thing is to get baselines for over a period of time so that you know where your levels, you test the same every time, same place every time. Then you can build up some evidence and some data to indicate, to show you where we are. But if you want to talk a bit more about something.
That line in the response talks about what we've already spoken about in terms of the ongoing monitoring that is already underway. Yep.
And just to be clear, because I know with the recommendations, the scientific panel said this is obviously, these are island-wide, that it's not specifically focused on contamination area, but of course we've just talked.
There is another one then.
But of course of course, what do you mean? There's another
Well,
contaminated
no,
area.
sorry.
There
I
is
thought you
Another
meant
recommendation.
another recommendation specific to the plume area.
Specific to the area
Yes,
of
exactly.
contamination.
That's what I meant.
And I was, and with these discussions around soil washing and filtration, and you know, if there's need for, I suppose, a infrastructure like an improved incinerator or off island. You know, have you weighed up the because of course these recommendations are about that wide island, but there is that specific, you know, plume area. Do you see that there, when we're assessing this, the kind of responses here, would that just be for that island wide when there are spikes with PFAS, or this what we're discussing now, soil washing, etc., is for the plume area too? And where I'm saying is, of course, we all talk about not having finite resources, and you know, is there a finite resource to send? How much will we send off island? You know, will we be focusing first on the contaminated area and second everywhere else? If you see what I mean, has there been like kind of this cost analysis in trying to
I
understand?
can respond to that.
Okay,
Madam Minister.
yeah.
I think what the PFAS panel was clear on is leaving it quite open to areas of responsibility. This is not meant to be recommendations for governance. It could be recommendations for individual companies or landowners or things like that. So that is an important point, and an important point that the public have raised in the public meetings is this is their scientific evidence of what could happen if triggers are met and investigations are found, and that land needs to be remediated or water needs to be remediated, what type of technologies are out there that would be most suited. It wasn't pointing to that being undertaken by a particular body. So I think that's where, no, there has not been a cost analysis for soil washing or a particular type of removal, you know, on the public, because it would only be in a particular circumstance. The point of the panel's recommendation is just the question of all the technologies across the world that deal with the remediation of PFAS in soil or deal with the remediation of PFAS in water, what would they recommend is the best type of technology? So the whole chapters on the technological readiness of different types of technologies and interventions and things like that. So it was a sort of a global landscape analysis of if you were going to go down, if anyone proposes to go down the route of types of remediation for PFAS, what could they look at? So I would say that the recommendations were not pointed to a body of responsibility, and that is a question that has been raised by the public repeatedly. Who is going to do this? Who is responsible for this? And I think it's quite clear in the government response that that is not where we are at this stage.
And just to follow up on that one, and obviously we've got this proposition coming in next week. So with all of that uncertainty and all of that sort of waiting for knowledge and more information, etc., why bring the proposition in next week?
Well, there's a number of reasons for that. The first one is that I am going to be consistent, and what I've said all the way through is that right from the outset, I have told everybody that I am determined to make some positive and actual proper changes during my time in office, and I've indicated all the way through I was going to do it before Christmas. And I've never changed my view that I was going to take action before I parted company with my ministry. So that would be the first thing. The other one is the scientific evidence very clearly shows, through the work that the scientific panel have done, that PFAS is something that accumulates in your body. There's a targeted amount that you can tolerate on a weekly basis. They've done the calculation, given the amount of food that we eat and the type of food, they've analysed this and everything else, and they are very clear the level in water should be 4. I'm satisfied as the Minister for the Environment, who in this instance is the regulator. I have to take a lot of hats off here and put my regulator hat on and say, I've got the evidence, I've asked this team of experts to do the work for me, they've come up with a recommendation, I'm satisfied very clearly it's the right level, I'm going to put it in place, I've not changed my view, that's what I've said all along.
Could I also add that just in terms of my response, there wasn't uncertainty in the scientific background of the technologies or the recommendations. The point was around the responsibility of who would carry it out. And that is for policymakers, and it would be for a new government to determine as this advice develops. So I don't believe that I said that there was uncertainty in the basis of the recommendations.
And I think now,
Stepping into.
yes,
Sorry,
can carry on
stepping
because
into
that was the areas.
I was going to
that-
come back to the soil testing, which I think is just something I wanted to clarify.
Yes, let's
You know, if we
finish that
have
here.
10 fields here and we've tested one over there and one over here, why would we, and they're both good and fine and we haven't found, why would we want to start testing the one in the middle unless something transpires? However, if somebody's about to do a large development where they need to extract a lot of soil from underneath and it's in the middle of a built-up area where there may be unknown things that happened in previous generations, you may well want to test that.
And does that happen?
That's,
Because we've got 2 sites potentially in area that is.
I'm not,
I can
well,
say
Kelly might be able to- I'm
in
not
terms of a
aware.
number of large planning applications, they have done testing, and those results are on the planning register, available for anyone to view the levels. And where appropriate, the planning officers have put conditions. Some have been discharged because the levels are so low. They are not PFAS affected sites.
Well, I think the point I'm trying to make here, Chair, is we're not going to be out there analysing every field that we're going to grow potatoes in next year.
Yes.
Because at the moment, there's absolutely no need to do that. The testing shows it's fine. However, you've got a specific site, you're going to dig a big hole in the ground. It's only right that planning now say, well, okay, because we ask, you know, what you do with the waste material that comes off any site, as particularly Deputy Coles will know, part of the planning application. So it's only right that we say, okay, we'll test that because we need to know if it's going to Locola or if it's going wherever. We need to know what it's got in.
And again, you're absolutely right, Mr. That would be dependent on a DESPACE analysis as well, as to whether it's proportionate and appropriate to test, depending on the circumstances of the site.
Sorry, it's just triggered one more question. That is, you know, you were talking about where PFAS comes from. So it's not just simply water. We recognise it comes from food and all sorts of other areas. So your proposition next week is about water in particular, and yet you acknowledge there's a lot of other sources of PFAS, you know, in terms of food. I get why you want to focus on water. You want to be seen to be doing something and carrying out some action, but it's kind of, there's a sense of you're picking on water as opposed to all the other areas, and we're not quite clear what those other areas might be contributing to.
I'm certainly
to
not
that.
picking on water.
So that's why I'm
because
just,
we need to-
and
If this is the amount of water, the amount of PFAS you can put in your body in a week without
Yes, sure.
causing effects,
Sure.
you know, there's 20% of the bottom is water. I can't get away from that.
No, I get that.
So I'm not picking on water. It's 20% of the way that people take PFAS into their body. The important thing here is how much PFAS is there in the food. We've done the analysis. Therefore, you come to a calculation that says what's the level of PFAS in water that you can only allow to make sure that this glass doesn't have more than that amount of PFAS in it in your daily, weekly intake. And that's what the panel did. They went away, they analysed the food. In different circumstances, if the food had come back differently, they may well have turned around, and they did warn us they could do this. They said, we're not going to increase the level of 4 to 6 or 8 or 10, but we might decrease it to 2 if the amount of PFAS coming from food is not where we expect it. Because the body can only tolerate a certain amount before it starts to accumulate. If the amount of PFAS you're getting out of your food increases, the amount you can allow in your water to keep your toleration levels at where they should be is less.
Okay.
So it was important to test the food to find out where the water level should be in order to get to a weekly tolerable level,
Thank you.
or tolerable weekly level, whatever they call it.
Thank you.
Water.
So yes, as has been alluded to, we are going to hit on to P26 2026 and the drinking water readiness. So first couple of questions have kind of been gone through already, but can you update the panel on the current stages of discussions with Jersey Water about the feasibility, cost and delivery times and operational impacts on achieving the 4 nanograms per litre?
Well, I've got a lot of information from Jersey Water here. We've been talking to them, obviously, as you would expect, regularly for a number of years, not just about PFAS, but about all sorts of water issues. And I certainly, I can't remember, I can't recollect doing it officially, but I know in discussions with them right at the beginning of this PFAS journey, if you like, I said to them, I want you to get on with PFAS work because I can't tell you where it's going, but we're definitely going to do something. You will need to do something in the future. So please start work even before there's any instruction as to what to do or how to do it. So Jersey Water have been with on this journey all the way through. As I said, I've got a lot of evidence here where they've made representations, not just to us, but to the panel about their views. And certainly all the way through last year, we were very consistent about where we were going. And apart from mentioning that the timeline might be challenging, that obviously depended on where we went and what we did. They've always been very comfortable with the level. Now, whether they are not comfortable with it, I'm not sure, but certainly since I lodged my proposition, it's clear from talking to other states members that Jersey Water are not happy with me. That's their big, but as I say, I have been extremely consistent with my views all the way through, and for myself, I can say as far as I was concerned, Jersey Water knew where I was going, they knew my intentions, they should have known my intentions. I spoke about them often enough, I indicated publicly what I intended to do. And very recently, Jersey Water appear to be saying, and of course it's evident from the amendments that are being brought forward and discussions that we're having in private and in public, you know, they're looking for treatment works costing anything up to £220 million. That's a multiple of multiples more expensive than any indication I've had previously from them. Up until now, we've spoken about GAC, we've spoken about ion exchange at the two existing treatment works.
What does GAC stand for?
Granular activated carbon, and ion exchange being two processes which you could work together, and putting those facilities into both their existing treatment works at £10 million ago, so potentially £20 million on each site. And that's where we were, as far as I was concerned. I'd had no information. It's clear that Jersey Water did not expect me to lodge a proposition in the States Assembly. They've made that very clear to me. They've made it clear to other people as well. I'm surprised that they didn't realise that. I've never indicated anything other than I would be coming to the States Assembly in my time in office with something. The panel have been very clear throughout last year, especially as we got to the end of the year, about where the level was going to be. They said they wouldn't be changing that level, especially after they did the food work. That was important. And we are where we are.
And Jersey Water has recommended waiting for the upcoming WHO, World Health Organization, PFAS drinking water guidelines, which are expected in around 27-28, to avoid Jersey adopting a limit which may quickly become obsolete. Was this considered before lodging?
Well, certainly I've discussed WHO recommendations with the scientific panel, and they have been very clear with me how that process will work. And I think we know the World Health Organization are what they say on the tin. They are a world organization, and they've made it very clear that they will be having to put recommendations in place for all countries around the world, and very many of those countries will be less advanced than we are here. Many of them will have PFAS levels which will be more difficult to solve because they don't have the technology or the means or the resources to do that. And I think it will be no secret that the World Health Organization recommendations will have to be significantly higher, because they will have to hope, or they will hope that many of these or less developed countries will then be able to get to those levels. But I think imposing a level, if you like, of 2 or 4 nanograms a litre on the vast majority, a large number of countries around the world would be an impossible target.
And if I could add, the World Health Organization, their guidelines for drinking water quality says that member states should strive to achieve concentrations of drinking water that is as low as reasonably practicable. So that's also what the PFAS panel have acknowledged and recommended in their report. So for Jersey, they feel that it is a practicable level to get to 4 nanograms, and we should strive to achieve that as a precautionary and ambitious, target, because, it's not necessary to, as the Minister said, to wait for the WHO is considering a vast, global landscape, when actually, we could protect the population by achieving a different level, specifically tailored to Jersey.
Yeah. You used the word practicable. In my experience with health and safety over the years, practicable is normally a thing of risk versus time and cost. So Jersey Water have advised that it could be anywhere between 12 and 18 months for a pilot scheme to determine which is the most appropriate treatment technology to achieving the 4 nanogram limit. So there's questions in that come about. So who's going to fund that pilot work, the agreements and decisions to be made, and also obviously what this would do for the timeline that's imposed within P2026.
Well, the first thing to say, Deputy, is I fully support Jersey Water in their trial work. We spoke about trial work all the way through last year. I applaud the efforts they're making. They've allowed a certain amount of money in their recent allocation of funds for ongoing expenditure for PFAS, and that, I believe, is specifically to do this trial work. They're importing a lab at scale that will allow them to test water. I absolutely understand the need to analyse water over a long period of time, as we said right at the beginning. The amount of PFAS, the amount of chemicals that we find in other things we find in our water, they vary depending on the time of year, the levels of rainfall. So it's really vital to do at least more than a minimum of 12 months, ideally longer, to analyse where your water levels are. I also understand absolutely that we need to make sure we know what type of water we have in Jersey, and of course that sounds like a strange thing to say, but and I'm no expert, but the differences in the type of organics in your water make a difference to the way you treat water to eliminate PFAS. So this trial work needs to be done. I absolutely accept that. It should be no surprise to me or to Jersey Water that they need to do the right thing, and I absolutely want them to come up with the best process. Everybody wants to get the best process for all the number of reasons, whether that's most effective, most cost-effective, productive, you name it. Where we differ is on timeline. The panel were very clear. They spoke to a number of people, experts in this field, people who'd actually installed these processes on other plants around Europe and outside of Europe. A number of people said they had managed it in less than 3 years. The panel were very receptive to the argument from Jersey Water that the physical challenges of both Horndois, Ogre less so, but particularly Horndois, would make it difficult. And the panel allowed them another 2 years to allow for the practical challenges of maybe having to have specialist bits of equipment built and installed. What I want to go and focus on now is the other reason why I don't actually see a fundamental problem with the timeline where it is the word dispensation. And all the time I've been minister, going back to 2014, Jersey Water have always asked for dispensations. Most recently, the one that I remember the most is nitrates. I've gone to Jersey Water dispensations for nitrates in the past. They're currently working under a dispensation which I gave them for nitrates now. And I'm absolutely clear, and have been absolutely clear, if we move forward as I propose, we get 3.5, 4 years into this process, and it's clear that there's some challenges somewhere which are going to make it difficult to achieve 4 nanograms in the prescribed time. You turn up, make your case, come to the Minister and sit down, and the Minister will seriously consider granting a derogation. Why would you not wish to do that? And there's no intention here to set a timeline which is unachievable with a goal of getting at the end of it and coming down heavily on Jersey Water because they haven't achieved it. Provided we're all working together and working as hard and as quickly and as practicably as we can for the best solution, that's what we need to be doing.
I think, Minister, then I suppose it comes back to the Minister at the time making that dispensation and weighing that up with obviously the public trust in the water that we're drinking. And the same thing, I would say, that maybe there's not that awareness that there is that on nitrates, for example. So maybe how would a minister go about making sure that the public still would trust that there is there's going to be still that guideline to go down to 4 if that dispensation has to keep happening because the timeline was set unrealistically in the first place. I think I'd be worried that 3 years down the line and we're nearing the 5 and Jersey Water have only managed to get down, say, to 10 and saying it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be another 5 years and till we get to the 4. How would the government, because then that is a government really responsibility for that trust.
We've always worked really closely with Jersey Water. I see no reason why that relationship shouldn't continue. We want it to continue. It's nobody's interest not to work together on this, and provided Jersey Water make a serious, treating the subject as seriously as we are, we're moving forward together. They can say, look, we've done this. That's how long it took. We've done this. We've spent this. We've done that. If we're getting close and they're not where they need to be, you apply for a dispensation. If a minister doesn't, we're going to talk about appeal. I want to talk very quickly about appeals on dispensation. One has an appeal and one doesn't. And if the minister refuses to give a dispensation, Jersey Water could appeal that to the Royal Court. So I absolutely understand the rogue minister or, worst case scenario, and it's important that we consider that.
Pressure from the public.
But in any case, if a minister in the future refused to grant a dispensation and Jersey Water felt they'd been particularly hard done by, there is another authority at the other end of this building where they could go and all the evidence will be put on display. And if the judge feels that Jersey Water have done what they could do and they haven't acted unreasonably, there's an appeal process there. The other one is, of course, that there's no appeal against a dispensation being given.
Be granted, exactly, by a
once the
third
minister
party.
gives the dispensation, there's no appeal against
Yes,
that.
and I think it's also an important point in terms of the dispensation process, that in terms of trust to the public, that there has to be a consultation with the health minister in terms of safe levels. So there's a process built within the law that says actually with this dispensation, is there going to be an impact on public health? And, to have both ministers then arrive at that, I think would build the argument in terms of trust.
There's just some really interesting wording which has been brought to my attention called wholesomeness. Jersey Water is supposed to, by law, provide drinking water that is wholesome.
Yep.
Would you say Jersey Water currently provides drinking water that is wholesome and meets that remit at the moment?
Absolutely.
Yes, I do.
No question about that whatsoever.
Some of the other challenges that Jersey Water will face is the implementation of treatment works at these sites. Of course, you're also the minister that's responsible for planning. Do you feel there's any sort of tension between your role as the person who's responsible for planning and seeing that Jersey Water get through in line with the island?
No, I mean, I mentioned a number of hats I wear before, and of course this is one that's a bit contentious, if you like. But quite often people say to me, Minister, what about this planning application or that? And I have to say to them, and it amazes them sometimes, as Minister, the last thing I do is get involved in planning applications because ultimately most of them could end up on my desk for determination. It's important I don't even look at them. So it may well be. My gut feeling would be, and I know Kelly's jumping at the bit here, but my gut feeling would be that there would be a likelihood that there might well be a public inquiry on something as significant as a new treatment works or an extension to treatment works, in which case we would have an independent inspector from the UK to go through the whole process of, in public, of inquiring into this application, and that inspector would make a recommendation to the Minister. Generally, that's quite difficult to go against a recommendation unless you've got, and of course then there's an appeal to the Royal Court. Again, if,
And again, absolutely. And then again, the rules of the public inquiries, the minister can actually call a panel. So it could be the minister, the assistant minister, and the committee chair that actually determines the public inquiry, just not the minister alone. But absolutely, minister, perfect answer in terms of it goes through a public inquiry that is a very high level of scrutiny with an independent inspector. So a potential new treatment works that might be outside of the island plan, but is in the island's whole population interest of a substantial departure, that could be potentially a public
I mean,
inquiry.
the other thing I would add to that, of course, is that we're about to have an election. Surprise, surprise. We will also, in the not too distant future, have an island plan review. And I would have thought by that time that the working with Jersey Water, we would be developing ideas about what might be happening. There's every opportunity within the policies of the island plan that's going to be redebated to allow for that. So when an application came to the department to be determined probably by the committee, it may well be there will be policies in that new island plan which would make that a lot easier. But that's yet to be determined. But that's the way it would normally work, where you're about to debate a new island plan. Anything really significant which is likely to come forward is considered, so that there's policies put in so that it doesn't challenge the island plan.
Absolutely, and the current island plan also talks significantly about water resources into the future. So.
Is there any requirement with this move towards the 4 nanograms per litre for Jersey Water to annually report? And if not, was it considered to embed it within legislation?
There was consideration given to a number of options. It won't be a surprise, but I do know that the panel considered I'm trying to think of the word to use, but a grading of levels over a period of time, and whether that would be a preferable way of doing it. But they came out in the end, and I'm trying to remember the reason why. But they certainly considered grading, so that the proposition I lodged could say, after 2 years this level, and then a lower, and a 10, and an 8, and a 6. I can't remember the reason. It was considered, but it was decided to stick with the 4 at the end of the period.
Yes, that's a recommendation from the panel around keeping an eye on a target of 10 nanograms, so the sum of 48 PFAS. There is just to come back to the question in terms of within the water law, there is a requirement for Jersey Water to provide an annual report. And they do that regularly. And in fact, they have voluntarily always, for a number of years now, reported on the 48 PFAS compounds, even without the requirement in the law. I think that's a really positive step from the water company, recognising the importance of the issue, that they already provide that information. And that is all in the public domain as well on their website.
What are the regulatory consequences if the deadline cannot be met due to operational delays or challenges?
Well,
subject to you not giving dispensation, of course.
I'm trying to think what the answer would be. I mean, my straight answer would, I hope it wouldn't get into that situation, because the minister would grant a derogation which would allow Jersey Water to exceed any of the requirements so it would be either exceed the 4 or exceed the 5 years. And that's the way it works. I mean, that's the way it worked when they came to see me about nitrates. There's a lot of pressure on me to resist giving them a dispensation for nitrates when I did that most recently. But Jersey Water make the case. They they explain the rationale behind the reason they want a dispensation, and if it's legitimate and it makes sense and they're genuine, that's the way it works. And I can't envisage a situation where Jersey Water would be falling foul of any law, because I would expect them to work with us and us to work with them to a situation where we're getting down to that level as quickly as practicable.
I would also just add it, just in terms of the law, it's I believe it's Article 30 that has the minister may instruct the company to carry out surveys and make reports in terms of the water. Where the minister feels after the query, if the company has failed to provide that adequate supply of water, then the minister would declare the company in default, and there is a range of articles within the law that goes into Royal Court rules and appeals. Obviously, it's incredibly serious at the very far end of the four E's of enforcement, but the articles are set out in the water law.
Obviously, there is an amendment that's been lodged by the Treasury Minister. I don't know. Do you have any broad comments around your views?
Well,
on...
it's we've had an interesting. Obviously, the Treasury Minister's got her view, and I've had my view, and I have told other ministers and the Council of Ministers and anybody else who wants to listen, and I've told it you. I've said it again here today. I started this journey 2 and a bit years ago, and I've been very clear all the way through that I would bring a proposition to the States Assembly before the end of my term of office. I told the PFAS panel beginning of last year I wanted some recommendations on water. They issued the interim report before Christmas, and my intentions have been clear all the way through.
I did have another question here around funding, but I think you've been quite clear already that obviously Jersey Water said that it can be anywhere between 140 and 210 million pounds, but you're saying that the panel has made suggestions that there could be solutions in around the 40 million pound figure. I mean,
Yes,
is there anything...
I mean, yes, and I mean, there's a number of documents I could refer to where we've had correspondence with Jersey Water, and as I'm not going to go back on what I said earlier about the change of direction, but I don't believe that the bringing of the proposition has any, really serious analysis of. There's a massive difference between 220, 130, all these numbers getting bandied about. I'm not sure aware that we've done any serious analysis on any of that. In any case, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, while a brand new treatment works has been mentioned, nothing that I have seen from Jersey Water up until I lodged my proposition that indicated there was any problem with the treatment works, 2 treatment works that they're using at the moment. There is some refurbishment work to be done, I accept that, but the indications have always been, right until I lodged my proposition, that they could cope with granular activated carbon, ion exchange at their 2 current treatment works. For redundancy purposes, they need to do both, and that the levels were in the low tens of millions of pounds.
But would they just 2 seconds, and then because it may help with but was that indication of those technology to get to the 4? So it was, just to link that up, that technology that were being put, that Jersey Water were doing to reduce the PFAS level. Did they communicate to you that that technology would be able to help them get to the 4?
Yeah, I mean, there's other ways of reducing PFAS which have been discussed. Powder activated carbon is one, which I believe it's currently being used now. There's a lot of waste material, for want of a better word, which comes out of that, which needs to be dealt with. It's seen as a short-term measure, but not recommended by the panel as a medium or long-term measure. But Jersey Water have indicated in the past granular activated carbon ion exchange was the methods that their preferred methods of getting to 4 nanograms.
I could clarify. Just in terms of the timescale, the indication that the very, very early indications, which were in the tens of millions, was in March 25. So to answer the question, it was before the panel proposed the number of 4 nanograms per litre, which was in the August of 25. Just in terms of Deputy Cole, the questions around the panel have not passed a statement or judgment on Jersey Water's indications of costs. What they have indicated is that they have had evidence from other countries that were taking progressive approaches for the targets of 4 nanograms and 2 nanograms have installed treatment plants from start to finish in 3 years at a range of 14 million, or there was 20 million in a different example. So they were saying that from other examples around the world, they would consider what the evidence is showing them is with costs within the range of tens of millions is what they're seeing, and that even in countries that have particular physical constraints, 3 years was, a timescale that had been achieved. So it wasn't to say that the panel were passing a commentary that, Jersey Water, in terms of the timescale that they would need and the cost they would need, is not necessarily a conclusion that the panel have drawn specifically per se. And then I said those original estimates were in early
And the
25.
technology that was that the panel looked at
The technology, yeah.
was the same that what the minister is
so-
saying. It was a similar.
I think at this point, Jersey Water or also, we are at this point in agreement with the best type of technology being granular activated carbon and ion exchange, as opposed to other technologies such as foam fractionation or reverse osmosis.
There's nanofiltration.
And nanofiltration.
The other one, of course, is
those are the two
reverse
primary.
osmosis, but I think and of course the one about reverse osmosis is there's only, you put a certain amount of water in, you only get a percentage of that out, and a certain amount of it goes to waste. And the last thing we need to do in Jersey is to develop a process where you chuck a litre of water into a process and you only get whatever, 80, I can't remember what the numbers are, but there's a reasonable
But I was just trying to
amount of
get
water
to
goes to waste.
Minister, you said that you were looking. Your decision of going to the 4 within that time frame was based on the understanding that technology that you've mentioned was the technology could do it, and I was just assessing that the scientific panel also basically came to that conclusion.
That's right. The two proven technologies worldwide at scale, for example, Sweden put very inaccessible places across their whole network in a very short period of time. So the two proven technologies is granular activated carbon and ion exchange, that they work for particularly constrained science, as we understand it, and that's the evidence that the panel have presented. And that's in the backdrop of a wide range of technologies, and that's what we asked them to do. Can you tell us out of 20 different types of technologies what is the best, the most practical, the most ready, the most proven, the most effective and efficient? And that's the advice. And as I understand it at this point, that Jersey Water is in agreement with those type of technologies is best.
They debated and argued these options. I lodged my proposition. I was under the impression, and I'd seen nothing to the adverse effect other than Jersey Water starting to indicate towards the end of last year that maybe 5 years might be a time challenge. But I dealt with that absolutely by saying, well, there's derogations and that's what they're there for. But I've not, the 30 million pound new plant is clearly a complete replacement of both Hondois and Augre. That's never been indicated to me that was necessary. I'm not saying a discussion wasn't had about the possibility at some point we might have to have a completely new treatment works, fine. But when it came to the treatment of PFAS, we've always been under the impression, working with Jersey Water, that the granular activated carbon ion exchange, while it would be a challenge physically, especially in the valley below Hondois, and there might be ways of getting over that, I don't know, we were moving forward on that basis.
Thank you, Minister. And just conscious of the time, I think we'd move on to kind of more that interdepartmental coordination. I talked before that the panel has, always asked questions around PFAS of yourself, but also the Minister for Infrastructure. And then also you've, of course, talked about the Minister for Health within this. And so looking at these recommendations, but also, of course, you've got the 3 reports from before as well. How will you recommend, I suppose, because I know we're coming to the end of this government, but how do you see, and I suppose still looking really to Kelly, well, that the work will continue in this way, how would that coordination happen to ensure that the recommendations within the 4 reports are all working together and ensuring that we can move on and ensure that there is the recommendations are being implemented by the many stakeholders? How will that all happen together?
Well, I mean, democracy is the process that we work under. We're all going to the polls in June, and there's no guarantee that any of the 4 of us will be here. Some of us may, or some of us may not. And politicians are elected on manifestos, which they then try to implement. And it may well be that the next Environment Minister has a completely different view to me, but he will have to, they will have to deal with or work with the officers in the department in the same way that I have. And I'm sure Kelly will be saying, Minister, here's the work we've done previously. These are the recommendations of the panel. They're global experts. They spent 2 years with us, and this is what we came to. This is the conclusions we came to. Would you like to take a look? And do you have a particular view? And it may well be that the new minister says, well, I'm not very happy about this, but they will, they will have to have a justification for doing that, because if next week's debate in the Assembly comes out with a conclusion, there will be something there to move forward with.
And absolutely, Mr. To answer the point about the water quality and safety team, the programme team, work in the background, we will be continuing with our work and our coordination. So we have a programme team that brings forward officers from the Natural Environment Directorate, the Regulation Directorate in food testing, as well as pollution control and regulatory improvement and ops and transport and the communications unit and public health. So a variety of within different departments. Myself as Senior Responsible Officer leads that team, and we will continue to meet and coordinate. It helps ensure that we're efficient, that we're coordinated, that we're not duplicating work, and then we sort of keep the emphasis on progressing this as well.
The other one thing that will not change is that we will still have a hotspot for PFAS at the airport. And regardless of who the minister is after the summer, the hotspot will still have PFAS there, and it will still be leaving the site. And that remediation work will have to happen, because as a regulator, regardless of who it is, there's an obligation there. The pollution has been identified. We know where it is. Work has to be done. Remediation has to take place. Ports of Jersey are doing that work and coming up the street. But regardless of who it is and what they think, the remediation of the airport, will have to continue, because it's a legal obligation.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important, yes, there's 2 steps, and was just to make sure that there is that consistency, and maybe
well, there will be a consistency at the airport, because we know there's a pollution. We know the pollution is leaving the site. Officers within the regulatory department have identified that. They have issued instructions to ports.
So, yeah.
They have a timeline to work to. They have a remediation strategy to present in a timely manner, and they will have to move forward and do something about it.
We will continue to work on those areas and the monitoring, and obviously the department officers are available for the public for continuing questions, answers, comments. We provide information as best we can. We talk to people on a regular basis to alleviate any concerns or anxieties they have. So we'll be there and available to continue that work. I suppose the key thing really for the new government is key policy decisions, and that will be really for the next ministers.
Yes, and I think that is probably quite key and something we're trying to get to, because the response, it's highlighted in this work that their policy readiness is different in different areas.
Yes.
And so that is I was trying to draw out how that is going to make sure that we could see this time next year, this panel can sit here and maybe have an update or a specific panel looking at PFAS and say how, is that policy readiness come to all of the different areas that these reports have highlighted, from report 1 to report 4?
It's a very good point, Chair, and I think that there are points of new policy that could potentially emerge, but that will have to wait for the direction of the new government and the new ministers.
I think I'd go back to my analogy of the 10 fields, and if you've analysed one over here and one over there, why would you... we don't have enough time and resource to do a whole load of other stuff. Why would we start analysing stuff where we're fairly sure it's okay? So I think that might generally apply across the whole PFAS area. We haven't got enough time, we haven't got enough officer time or money in the department or money in government to start spending do a whole load research on stuff where we don't think there's a problem. We don't want to go looking for it. We can address issues as they come to us, or we identify them, but I don't think we need to start going out deliberately looking for trouble, so to speak.
No, but I think this is specifically trying to make sure that there is that interdepartmental coordination.
Yes. Yes.
And make sure that maybe there's not so much political interference at some of those levels to ensure that there is this, consistency in that the public are, feel that there is things that are going to be.
I
be
can
happening.
confirm that my team
my
will
big thing is
continue.
consistency. I like to treat everybody the same, and if there's, setting precedent's really important for me, because or not setting precedent, actually, depending what you're looking at. So consistency is important, and I want all departments to be taking this equally seriously. And I think we've highlighted to those relevant departments, and certainly Health are taking it seriously. We've got a whole team there now up and running and helping people with their blood. We're talking to infrastructure about the collet, we're talking about levels of PFAS and all sorts of things moving around the island.
And I would like to just say as well, just that there is a large group of officers from lots of different departments who have come together to try to bring this issue really to central, to government. And I'd also just like to thank them. They have put a huge amount of work in the past years to get us to where we are. And particularly, I would also like to thank the regulatory improvement team, Terry and Matt, who've just coordinated and organised this absolutely brilliantly. And we are really in a good position because of the work of officers, lots of overtime, lots of commitment, and goodwill. And would just like to say
notwithstanding
thank you
what's
for that.
happening at the moment, and I've been mentioned the airport, but we've got a steering group, government, regulatory department, Ports of Jersey, Jersey Water. I thank them all for the work, and just notwithstanding what, we've got some arguments over this, but let's look at that. Jersey Water have worked fantastically well with us and with Ports in addressing in a collegiate way how we're going to tackle this problem. It's in everybody's interest. Ports want it resolved. Jersey Water want it resolved. They want to be able to carry on pumping water out of Port Marquet or down in St Wands for that matter sometime in the future. It's in everybody's interest to work together, and people have worked together really well on this problem. And in 2 years, we've achieved a lot. There's no doubt in my mind.
Thank you. And I suppose the last, as we're wrapping up, the last kind of question for me is that future risk planning. How does the government intend to kind of embed that future risk planning? Because of course this is still an emerging area of science and policy, as we hear Jersey is one of the first to look at this with setting up the scientific panel and looking at those. But even last night at the meeting the scientists there were saying, some things are still developing, and then there's a lot of areas to still consider. So how is the government going to make sure that this is kind of also that longer lens is being looked at with the work, not just in implementing these recommendations and trying to contain the plume area even more and kind of keep that under control, but that as the science emerges, there may be suddenly we find other areas that we hadn't tested before.
Well, I think we're getting into an area of known unknowns and unknown unknowns, but certainly
the last question.
but certainly this is one of known unknowns, and let's go back a number of years before we thought that nitrates were a problem in water. Let's go back 12, 13 years when we didn't realise oxydixyl had such a long half-life and was something we'd sprayed on potatoes, which, asbestos, PFAS, what we don't know is what's coming next, but we can be fairly sure there will be something coming next. And we're looking at long-chain PFAS, short-chain PFAS, we're looking at TFAs. We know there's stuff coming down the line, and we need to be aware of that. What it is, I can't tell you exactly, but we can be absolutely sure that there will be further challenges as we move forward. And while we don't know what they are, we're going to have to at least try to put something in place to at least allow us to work towards those challenges when they come forward. I don't know what that is, but I think it would be very foolhardy to say these particular PFAS are the last challenges we're ever going to have, because whether it's in air, whether it's in water, or whether it's in soil, it's clear we live in a world of man-made products. Something's going to come and bite us.
And I would also say, Minister, also the public keep us honest, and I would also like to thank the public who bring this to us attention, and some of the continual efforts, or particularly for the residents who are in the area of non-contamination around the airport, have done a huge amount to also bring government, to a point where we are, taking action now, and we speak regularly with them, and it is credit to them as well that we are in the position as a government and as a community where we are right now. So I would hope that public engagement continues, and that will also be part of government's ongoing commitment.
Thank you. Just turning to my panel, if they've any other questions. Well, we've reached the time of the end of the hearing, Minister, and I'd like to thank you for your time and for officers' time as well in preparing for this. And I'd also again like to also thank the community who have inputted into the scrutiny panel's work as well, to make sure that we are also up to date and knowledgeable about PFAS. It is a complicated issue. If we've heard, we probably haven't done it all completely justice in an hour and a half, but this is something that we know we have already agreed that we would recommend within our legacy report, that the next panel will either take it on, or there will be a standalone panel that will look at PFAS in the round to ensure that on our side, from scrutiny side, that will continue to monitor the recommendations and monitor that implementation and the areas that you've raised, Minister. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Chair. I've got very little to add. I think the Kellys particularly thank the residents who live in the Plume area, and I'd add my thanks to them. The meetings that I've had with them have been challenging on myself for lots of reasons, and I'm grateful that they've been so courteous in the way they've treated me and the Health Minister in the meetings we've had. They've been, and so I'm grateful for that. I've got nothing very much more to add, but you're right, there's more work to be done, and I'm confident that we will carry on.
Thank you. Well, that ends our hearings for this panel for this term of office. So thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you.